The third week of December. In the wash-house behind Hartfield Row, Clara Nunn held a gentleman's letter up to the gray window light and stopped breathing. She had been sorting a bachelor's linen, the ordinary work of her ordinary morning, and the letter had come out of a coat pocket the way small forgotten things do, folded twice, the seal broken long ago. She should have set it aside on the shelf where all such recovered articles waited for their owners. She did not. She looked at the writing on the cover, at the long-tailed capital that leaned left where every other letter leaned right, and the wash-house went very quiet around her, and the steam went on rising, and somewhere behind her Nan Pilcher was singing about a soldier. Clara knew that hand. She had watched that hand made. Or rather, she had watched what it did to the woman who received it. For 11 months she had sat at the bedside of Mrs. Broll. Edith Barrow of Chain Walk and read letters aloud in that same script, until the old lady could no longer hear them. And on the last night, the night the candle burned to nothing and the frost took the inside of the window, Mrs. Barrow had put a folded page into Clara's hands and closed her fingers over it and said a name. One name. Clara had not known then what to do with it. She had not known now either, and the letter in the wash-house shook a little, and she laid it down flat on the board and pressed her palm over it as though it might get away. Clara Nunn, said Mrs. Kells. Odell from the doorway, in the voice she kept for the girls who dawdled. The washerwoman does not read the post, fold, or find another house. The washerwoman does not read the post. Clara heard it, and she heard what was under it, which was that a woman with reddened hands is a pair of hands and nothing more, and she folded the shirt in front of her without looking at it, and her heart went on making a noise in her throat that she was certain the whole room could hear. She did not tell Mrs. Odell that the letter was signed with the Viscount's title. She did not tell her that she had seen that same tale on that same capital by candlelight for 11 months. She only worked, and the water went gray, and outside the sleet came down on the row. There were 9 women at the boards that morning, and Clara could have named the linen of every house on the street by the mending in it. The Fanshawe shirts came in with the cuffs turned twice, and the Fanshawe money had been gone 2 years, and everybody in the wash-house knew it, and nobody in Grosvenor Square did. The curate's collars came in gray at the fold and went out white, and came back gray in the same place, because a man who has one collar wears it the same way every day of his life. Linen tells. That was the thing about the work that nobody above stairs had ever understood, and that Clara, who had been raised to think herself above it, had learned in her first fortnight and had never once been able to unlearn. You could not put a household through a copper twice a week and not know what was in it. So when she said she knew a hand, she knew a hand. Mrs. Odell came back along the boards at 11 with the book under her arm and stopped at Clara's place and looked at her for a moment too long. Mrs. Odell was not a cruel woman. She had been a laundress at 14 and kept a wash-house at 40, and had learned somewhere in between that a girl who reads is a girl who will leave, and that a girl who leaves takes a fortnight's training with her. She looked at Clara the way a woman looks at a shilling she suspects is bad. You had a schooling, she said. My father kept a school. That is not what I asked. Mrs. Odell shifted the book. You had a schooling, and you are here, and I have never yet met the one that did not end in a fuss. Fold the shirts none. Clara folded the shirts. Stay with me a moment, because what she did next cost her everything she had. Clara was 24 years old and had not always been a laundress. Her father had kept a small school in Suffolk and had taught her Latin she had no use for, and a hand so fine that neighbors brought their letters to her to write. When he died, there had been nothing but the books, and the books had gone for the burial, and Clara had come to London with 1 box, and a character from the vicar, and she had gone into service as a companion because she could read aloud, and did not talk too much. Mrs. Barrow of Chain Walk had wanted exactly that. An old woman with a widow's jointure, a cat, and a correspondent. The correspondent was the point. Clara had understood it within a week. 6 times a year a letter came, and Mrs. Baxt Barrow would not open it in front of the maid, and would not open it until the room was still, and then she would hold it and look at nothing and hand it to Clara and say in the flat voice people use when they are protecting themselves, Read it. My dear, my eyes are poor. Clara had read them all. They were not love letters. They were something stranger and better. They were accounts. Sums paid, sums received, a schedule of a debt being cleared a little at a time by a man who signed himself only with an initial and a title, and who never once asked to be thanked. The last letter, the one in the dead woman's hand, Clara had not read. She had kept it in the lining of her box for 2 years, because a page pressed into your fingers by a woman with an hour left in her is not the sort of thing a person opens over a cup of tea. 2 years. Then a coat in the wash-house. Nan Pilcher, who was 15 and had opinions, told her the coat belonged to a gentleman lodging at the corner house, come up from the country for the season with a valet who paid 3 days late. Nan said his name, and Clara made her say it twice. The Viscount Everley. The name Mrs. Barrow had said with the candle going, not the initial, not the title alone, the whole of it spoken once, and then the room had got quiet in the way it does. Clara went back to the folding board and did not manage anything for a while. What she did not yet know was that the Viscount Everley had come to London for one purpose, and that purpose was to bury a matter he had spent 9 years failing to bury, and that a laundress with a good eye for a capital letter was the last thing in England he could afford. He came for the coat himself. That was the first wrong thing. Gentlemen do not come for their coats. Valets come, or boys, and the wash-house sees a hand and a shilling, and nothing else. He came at 4 in the afternoon with sleet on his shoulders, and stood in the doorway of a room full of steam and wet linen, filling it, and every girl at every board stopped. He was tall and very still. That was the thing Clara noticed first and kept noticing after. He did not shift his weight, did not look about him, did not do any of the small, restless things men do in rooms where they do not belong. He looked at the shelf where the recovered articles lay, and then he looked at the room, and then he looked at Clara, and stopped. "The coat," he said, "the blue one. There was a paper in it." Mrs. Pa. Odell was already moving, already smoothing, already saying that everything found was kept most carefully, my lord, most carefully, and would his lordship care to wait in the front where there was a fire? He did not answer her. He was looking at Clara's hands. She had the letter. She had put it in her apron at noon and had not been able to make herself put it back. And now it was there against her, and she felt it the way one feels a coal. "You have it," he said. Not a question. Clara took it out and held it across the space between them, and did not lower her eyes, which was a mistake. Or was not, she never afterward decided. He took the letter. His fingers were cold and hers were hot from the water, and the contact lasted perhaps a second and a half. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "My lord." He did not go. He stood with the letter in his hand and looked at her a moment longer than a gentleman looks at a laundress, and something in his face did a thing Clara could not name, and then it stopped doing it, and he inclined his head to Mrs. Odell and went out into the sleet. The room breathed. Nan said something about his shoulders. "Mrs. Sabary." Odell said to no one and to everyone that the girls were not to speak unless spoken to, and that some of them wanted reminding what they were. Clara stood at the board with her hands wet and her pulse going in her throat, and understood 2 things at once. He had known she had it before she gave it, and he had not asked her whether she had read it. That night in her room under the roof, she took out the box and cut the lining and unfolded a page that had been folded for 2 years. It was not a letter. It was a list. Names, 11 of them, and against each name a sum, and against each sum a date. And at the bottom, in Mrs. Barrow's hand, shaking, 4 words, "He has paid 9. Clara read it 11 times. She held it to the candle and read it again. 9 of 11 names had a line drawn through them and a date beside the line, and the dates went back 9 years, twice a year, patient as a tide. 2 names had no line. One of them was Barrow, the other was none. Clara sat on the edge of the bed with her father's name in her hands, in a dead woman's writing, and the cold coming up through the floor. And she did not weep, because there was no one to see it and no use in it. and because she had learned in 3 years of service that weeping is a thing you do when you have already decided what to do next. And she had not decided. Her father had died owing money. She had always known that. The books had gone for the burial. What she had never known, what no one had ever told her, was to whom. The season was underway, and Hartfield Row washed for half of it. Clara learned things at the boards the way one learns weather. She learned that Lord Everley had come up for the marriage market and everyone said so, and no one believed him. She learned that his aunt, the Dowager Lady Renshaw, had taken the house on Bruton Street and had a girl in it. Miss Sophia Craven, an heiress with £180 a year of her own and a way of tilting her chin. She learned that the Dowager had been telling the season for a month that Everley would announce before 12th night, and that he had not, and that people were beginning to make a small pleasant noise about it. She learned, too, that the Everley estate had a hole in it. Nan's brother carried coal to the Bruton Street kitchen, and the Bruton Street kitchen said the family had been 9 years scraping, and no one could say what for. Since his lordship kept no horses to speak of, and no woman and no card table, and a man who spends nothing must be spending it somewhere. Clara knew where. She wrote to him. She sat up 2 nights composing it, and burned 4 sheets, and in the end wrote 9 lines in her father's hand, which was her hand, the fine one the neighbors used to come for, and she wrote that she had been companion to Mrs. Benner, Edith Barrow, and that she had a paper of the late lady's, and that she wished to know one thing only, and would trouble him no further. She did not sign it, Clara. She signed it C. None. And she watched the name go down and knew what it would do when he read it. She sent it by Nan's brother with the coal. 3 days. On the 3rd day, a footman in a plain coat came to the wash-house door and asked for the woman who had written, and Mrs. Odell went the color of the wash-water, and Clara took off her apron and went out into the street with her hands still red and her hair coming down, and was handed into a carriage in front of the whole row. The row talked for a week. Clara did not care. Then she came to care. He received her in the library on Bruton Street alone, with the door standing open, which, she understood afterward, was for her sake, and understood at the time as coldness. It was a long room with the shutters half closed and a fire going and books to the ceiling, and he stood at the far end by the window and did not come forward. Miss Nunn, he said her father's name, in a viscount's mouth. Clara put her hand on the back of a chair without meaning to. You are Amos Nunn's daughter. I am? My lord. Sit down, he said. She heard an order. She sat because her legs had opinions of their own, and she disliked herself for it. And only much later did she understand that he had seen her hand on the chair back, and had said the only thing a man in his position could say that would let her rest. He asked what she had. She told him, in 9 sentences, the way she had rehearsed it at the mangle for 3 days, and he listened without moving, and without helping her, which she understood later was not coldness, but the courtesy of a man who has decided not to interrupt a person who has come a long way to speak. The room was very warm and smelled of leather and coal smoke and something green and cold from a bowl of forced hyacinths on the table by the shutters. Clara had not stood in a room like it since Chain Walk. She had forgotten what a ceiling that height did to a voice. Her own came back to her from somewhere above the shelves and sounded like a stranger's, and she made herself finish anyway. He asked to see it, and she said no, and the word came out of her plain and steady and surprised them both, and something at the corner of his mouth moved and was gone. Then ask, he said. Did my father owe you money? No. Did Mrs. Sebre? Barrow? No. Then, what is the list? The fire made its noise. Everley looked at the window a long moment. Clara watched his hand go to the breast of his coat. Flat. The way a man touches a thing he is checking is still there, and stop, and come away. Names of persons, he said, who lost money in a bank at Ipswich in the year 1811. The bank failed. 11 small depositors were not covered. That is not an answer. No, he agreed. It is not. He did not give her one that day. He gave her instead a thing she had not asked for, which was worse. He said that Mrs. Hassis Barrow had written to him of her companion for 11 months, and had said that the girl read Latin and would not take a penny above her wage, and had asked him, at the last, to see that the girl was not left to the parish. He said it levelly, looking at the window and not at her, and Clara sat in a Viscount's library, in a dress she had turned twice, and found that she could not get her breath in a room with so much air in it. "I did not know she wrote of me," she said. "You would not have permitted it." "No, I know," he said. Then he told her to go home, and she went, and in the carriage she pressed her hand against her own wrist, and felt her pulse there like something separate from her, an animal she was carrying. And she said aloud to the empty seat that a man does not mean anything by an order, and the animal did not believe her. He did not send for her again. She told herself she was glad. She was not glad. Twice in the following fortnight she saw the Everleigh carriage stopped at the top of Hartfield Row. For no reason a carriage stops, and she folded linen, and did not look up, and knew to the inch where it stood. Now the Dowager Lady Renshaw had a system, and the system had never failed her in 40 years. She did not shout. She arranged. She heard within a day that her nephew had received a woman from a wash-house in his library, with the door open and the servants watching. And she did what a woman of her rank does, which is to make the thing small before it can become large. She came to Hartfield Row herself. That was how sure she was. Clara was at the mangle when the carriage came, and Miss Craven came in first, holding her skirts up off the wet stones, with a face composed for a poor relation's cottage. And the Dowager came after and stood in the middle of the wash-house in silk the color of a bruise, and looked at the ceiling and the boards and the girls, and let the silence do its work. "Which is she?" said the Dowager. Mrs. Odell pointed. Lady Renshaw looked at Clara for perhaps 4 seconds. Then she turned to Miss Craven and said, in the clear carrying voice of a woman who has never once needed to lower it, "You see, my dear, a laundress. He has a charity, and it has a face. And there is the whole of the mystery, a laundress." The word went round the room, and every girl at every board heard it, and Clara stood with her hand on the mangle and her sleeves rolled in steam in her hair. And the terrible thing was that it was true. She was a laundress. The Dowager had not lied. She had only put the true word in the place where a person should be. "I am obliged to your ladyship," Clara said. For the correction, the Dowager's fan came up half an inch. It was the only thing about her that moved. They went. The room did not speak for a full minute. The mangle went on ticking as it cooled. Somewhere in the far copper, a sheet turned over on itself with a soft, heavy sound, like something settling in its sleep. Then Nan said a word that 15-year-olds should not know, and Mrs. Odell did not correct her. "She never even asked your name," Nan said. "She had no need of it. That's the same as saying you have not got one." Clara wrung out the sheet. Her hands were doing it without her. "She said the true thing, Nan. That is what makes it work. If she had called me a thief, I could have gone to a magistrate. She called me a laundress, and there is no court in England for that." Nan thought about it with her whole face, which was one of the best things about Nan. "Then it is a rotten word," she decided, "and not a rotten woman," and went back to her board. And Clara stood with her hands in the cold water, and found that a 15-year-old had got closer to it in 1 minute than she had got in a fortnight. That evening Clara found her box gone through and her lining cut wider than she had cut it, and the list still there, because she had stopped keeping it in the box a fortnight since and had been carrying it against her stays like a fool. And she sat down on the floor of her room and laughed once, without any pleasure in it, and understood that she was now a person. Things were done to. Everleigh came to the wash-house at 6 in the morning. There was no one but Clara and the coppers and the first gray light in the high windows. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand and rain on his coat, and he had not shaved, and Clara, wringing a sheet, saw him and did not stop wringing, because, if she stopped, she was going to do something she could not take back. "She came here," he said. "Her ladyship was good enough to instruct me in what I am." Clara, her given name, in his voice, in a wash-house, at 6 in the morning. Clara's hands went still in the water. He crossed the room. He stopped at the proper distance, and then he did not keep it, and she felt the cold coming off his coat, and the heat of the copper at her back, and she looked up at him. And he was not still at all. Not now. There was a muscle going in his jaw, and his eyes were the color of the window behind him, and he said, "I have not slept since you asked me what the list was. My lord, 9 years ago," he said. "I was 26, and my father was dying, and the bank at Ipswich was mine. Not my name on the door, my money in the walls. I had put it there, because a man I trusted told me to, and because I did not trouble to look at the books. 11 people lost everything they had. Your father lost a school. Clara's hands were in the water, and the water had gone cold. He came to me," Everly said. "In the spring, he stood in my hall in a mended coat and asked me for nothing. He asked me only whether I had known. I told him the truth, which was that I had not, and which was no answer. And he thanked me and went away, and I never saw him again, and in November he died." The rain came on harder against the high windows. "There were 11 names," he said. "I've paid 9. Mrs. Barrow would not take it, and I paid her physician instead for 4 years, and she knew it and permitted it, which was her particular kindness. And the 11th, he stopped. "The 11th, Clara said. "I could not find her," he said. "For 9 years I could not find his daughter. And then I did, and she was standing in a wash-house at Hartfield Row, with her hands in my linen, and I have not been able to look at anything else since Clara took her hands out of the water. They were red to the wrist and shaking, and she did not hide them, and he looked at them, and she watched him look, and neither of them said anything for a long moment while the copper ticked. 'Do not pay me,' she said, Clara. 'You will pay me, and I will be paid. And that will be the whole of what I am to you. And I find I cannot bear it.' Her voice did not break. She was proud of that afterward. 'Ask me for something else.' His hand came up. It stopped a hand's breadth from her face, near enough that she felt the cold of him on her cheek, and it stayed there, and did not arrive. 'Not here,' he said, and the words came out rough. 'Not in this room, where you are paid to stand. Not until I can ask you where the whole world can hear me.' He put his hand down. He went out. Clara stood in the steam with her face burning where he had not touched it. If a thing has ever cost you to want it, you will know what she felt. Stay with her. Lady Renshaw announced the engagement on the 2nd of January at a supper for 60 in the Bruton Street dining room, without asking her nephew. She did it beautifully. She rose between the courses with her glass and said that the family was happy, and named Miss Craven, and the table turned to look at Everly at the far end, and there was that noise a room makes when it is decided something is settled. Miss Craven inclined her head with the composure of a woman who has been told her whole life that she is the correct choice. Clara heard of it at the boards. From Nan, whose brother had carried the coal, she should have stopped there. She did not, and this is the part the Roe never understood and never forgave her for, because the Dowager, in her arranging, had made one small error. And Clara had spent 11 months reading a dying woman's post, and knew exactly what it was. Lady Renshaw had told the season for a month that the Everly money was sound. And Clara had a list, in the hand of a woman of unimpeachable respectability, of 11 small depositors of an Ipswich bank, with 9 of them struck through and dated, in the hand of a viscount that half the room had received letters from. She did not take it to the newspapers. She had no wish to ruin him, and would not have known how. She took it to Mr. Hollis, the solicitor who had settled Mrs. Barrow's estate, whose office was in Chancery Lane, and who had once, at the reading of the will, called Clara, the young person, for a full hour. She walked there in the rain and sat in his outer room for 3 hours and would not go, and at last he saw her, and she put the list on his desk and asked him one question: whether a private restitution, paid over 9 years without acknowledgment, was a debt of honor or a confession of liability. Hollis looked at the list for a long time. "Where did you get this young person?" "From the hand of Mrs. Barrow, on the night she died. She was your client for 30 years. You know her writing." He knew her writing. And what do you want of me?" "Nothing." "For myself," Clara said. "I want the 10th name struck through, and I want it done properly, and I want it done where his aunt can see it, because she is telling the season that he has been scraping for 9 years out of vice, and he has been scraping out of the other thing, and I will not have him carry that as well as the rest." Hollis took off his spectacles. He was 61, and had been a solicitor for 40 years, and had never once, he told her, been asked by a claimant to prove a debt she was not claiming. He put the spectacles down on the list, which Clara noticed, because a man who does not want to look at a thing puts something on it. "You were the young person," he said. "I was. I called you that for an hour." "You did." Hollis was quiet. Outside in Chancery Lane, a boy was crying coals in the rain and doing badly at it. The clerk in the outer room had stopped writing, which meant he was listening, which meant it would be all over the inns by Thursday. And Clara had known that when she walked in, and had walked in anyway. "Mrs. Barrow spoke of you," he said at last. "At the will. Before the will." She said her companion had a hand like a copper plate, and would not take the silver spoon she was offered. He turned the paper an inch. "I did not attend. I attend now. That is not an apology, young person. It is a fact I am setting down where you can see it." "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. You understand," he said, "that if I do this you will be in the room, and that a room like that will eat you." "Yes," Clara said. The 12th night ball at Bruton Street was for 200, with the candles doubled and the orchestra up on the landing and the terrace doors black with the frost outside. Clara came in at 11 o'clock at Mr. Kendris. Hollis's elbow in a gray gown Nan had turned for her and gloves that did not fit, and she saw the room see her. The music did not stop. Rooms like that do not stop. The room simply began, at one end and then along, to arrange itself around the fact of her, and by the time she had crossed half of it, there was a lane of quiet moving with her like weather. She had washed for 11 of the houses represented in that room. She knew it as she walked. She knew the Fanshawe girls' sleeves and where they had been let out, and she knew the state of Mr. Carr, Aubrey's shirts, and what the state of a man's shirt says about the state of his affairs. And she knew, walking through 200 people in a gray-turned gown, that not one of them had ever once considered that the woman who handled their linen might be in possession of the whole of their private history. The candles were doubled. That was the thing she had not been prepared for. She had imagined the noise and the looking, and she had not imagined the light, the sheer, wasteful, gorgeous quantity of it. Hundreds of flames going at once for 4 hours, because a woman on a dais wished the room to be bright. Clara had trimmed 1 candle a night for 3 years to make it last. Her gloves did not fit. She had known that at the door. She kept her hands down and open at her sides, and did not fold them, because a woman who folds her hands is hiding them. And she had decided in the carriage that she would not hide anything in that room, having nothing left that hiding would preserve. Lady Renshaw was on the dais, with Miss Craven at her hand, and her fan held at exactly the height it had been held at in the wash-house. "The Laundress," said the dowager, not loudly. She had never needed to be loud. It carried to 30 people, and 30 people carried it to the rest, and the word went out across the room the way a crack goes across ice. Clara stopped in the middle of the floor, with 200 people looking at her hands. Everly was at the terrace doors. She did not look at him. She had promised herself in the carriage that she would not look at him, because if she looked at him, she would not be able to do it, and she had come to do it. Hollis stepped forward and asked the dowager's permission to speak, which was a courtesy, and gave her no way to refuse it, which was not. He was very brief. He said that he was Mrs. Barrow's solicitor of 30 years. He said that he held a paper in her hand, witnessed and sworn to that morning, listing 11 persons who had lost their whole property in the failure of a bank at Ipswich in the year 1811. He said 9 of the 11 had been made whole, privately, without acknowledgement, over 9 years, by a gentleman who had signed nothing and asked for nothing. He said the 10th had refused and taken her physician's bills instead. He said the 11th was standing in the middle of the room and had come tonight, at his professional urging and against her own interest, to decline the money. The orchestra had stopped somewhere in the middle of it. Nobody had told them to. "Decline it," said someone quite clearly in the silence. "She has declined it 3 times in writing," Hollis said. "I have the letters. She wishes it recorded that Amos Nunn's daughter was not left to the parish, and that the gentleman's 9 years of scraping were not vice." Lady Renshaw's fan came down. It came down slowly, all the way, and lay in her lap, and her mouth opened and closed and opened. "That is not," she said. "There is no Sophia." Miss Craven did not answer her. Miss Craven was looking at Everly, and her face had gone through something, and come out the other side, and she stepped back from the dais, 1 step deliberately, and made a small space where she had been. The rival removed herself from the field. Clara saw it, and never forgot it. Everly crossed the room. He did not hurry. He came through 200 people who moved out of his way without being asked, and he stopped in front of Clara, and the whole of the noise in that room was 200 people not breathing. He took her hand. The glove did not fit, and he did not appear to notice. "Lady Everly, if she will have me." "Not the parish." 10 words. Clara heard them land and heard the room take them, and did not, for a moment, understand that they had been said to her. Nobody moved. The candles went on burning, and the frost went on the black glass. And somewhere at the back a woman began to cry in the way people do at things they did not expect to be moved by. Then the room came back, in pieces the way rooms do. A glass went down on a table too hard. An old gentleman near the terrace doors said, quite distinctly and to nobody, that he had had £400 in that bank himself, and had never seen a penny of it and had never expected to. A woman in green said the word Ipswich, and the word went round and came back. Changed. Somebody said 11, and somebody else said it again, and the number began to travel with the weight numbers have when a room has just been shown what they cost. Miss Craven's mother took 2 steps toward the dais, and then did not take a third, and the Dowager Lady Renshaw sat on her dais with her fan in her lap and her hands not quite steady, and said, to no one, "He never told me. 9 years, and he never told me." That was her humbling. It was enough. She had believed she was protecting a family from a scandal, and had spent 9 years defending a man against the truth, and the room heard her say so. Clara looked up at him. 200 people saw her do it. "I have red hands," she said. "I know," said the Viscount Everly. They were married in Suffolk in March, in a church 9 miles from where her father had kept his school, by a vicar who had known her father and cried through the whole of it, which everyone was too kind to mention. Nan came. Clara had asked for her by name, and Everly had sent the carriage, and Nan sat in the second pew in a bonnet she had not stopped touching since Tuesday, and told the coachman on the way home that she had opinions about the whole business and would be sharing them. Mrs. Odell was not asked. Clara had thought about it, at some length, standing at a window in a house with more windows than she could account for, and had decided that mercy did not require it. She sent the wash-house a quarter of beef at Easter instead, and no letter with it, and Nan wrote afterward to say that Mrs. Duran Odell had cut it herself, and given the best of it to the girls, and had said nothing at all for the whole of the afternoon, which for Mrs. Odell was a speech. Lady Renshaw came. She came late, and sat at the back, and left before the breakfast. And in April, she wrote to Clara 7 lines, in a hand that had lost some of its confidence, and asked whether she might call. Clara wrote back that she might. It took the Dowager until June to do it, and when she came, she looked at the room a long time before she sat down in it, and Clara let her have the silence, and poured the tea. By Christmas there was a school again. It was small. It was the front 2 rooms of a house in the village, with a stove that smoked, and 11 children in it, which was a number Clara had chosen, and never explained to anyone, and she taught the reading, and a curate taught the sums. The children were not afraid of her, which surprised her, and were extremely afraid of the stove, which did not, There was a boy called Robert Tice, who could not be got to sit down and who turned out in the second week to be unable to see the board for more than 4 feet, and Clara sat him at the front and he became the best reader in the room inside a month, and nobody was more astonished than his mother. There was a girl of 9 who came in Wednesdays only because the rest of the week she minded the babies. And Clara sent the week's work home with her folded small, in her own fine hand, the one the neighbors in Suffolk used to come for. On Wednesdays her husband came and sat at the back, on a chair too small for him, and did not say anything, and did not need to. The children had decided among themselves that he was not to be spoken to, and was not to be feared, which was a distinction Clara had never managed to teach anyone above the age of 20, and once in February. She looked up from the reading and found him watching her across 11 small heads, with an expression on his face that she had to look away from in order to go on. He never once, in all that year, said the word school aloud. He had a letter from Mr. Hollis in his coat about the leasing of the 2 front rooms, and he had never mentioned that either, and Clara found it in the wash one Thursday, and read the cover, and knew the hand, and put it back. On the last evening of the year, Clara sat by the fire at Everley, with the snow coming down past the window and the house quiet around her, and she took the paper out of her workbox and unfolded it, for the last time. 11 names. 10 struck through now, in Hollis's careful clerk's hand, with the 10th marked settled by marriage, 6 of February, and the 11th, Barrow, left open forever because the woman had wanted it so. At the bottom, in a hand that had been shaking, 4 words. He has paid 9. Clara put her thumb on them, the way she had put her thumb on them 100 times, and thought of a candle going out in a room on Cheyne Walk, and an old woman spending the last strength in her body to write a sentence that would take 2 years and a wash-house and a bank at Ipswich to finish. She heard him in the passage. She did not fold the paper away. He came in with the cold on his coat and stopped when he saw what was in her hands, and she watched his face do the thing it had done in a wash-house in December, and this time it did not stop doing it. "Read it to me," he said and sat down. The fire went on. The snow went on. Clara, who had once held a letter up to a gray window and stopped breathing, read the list aloud in the voice she had used for 11 months, at a dying woman's bed, all 11 names, slowly, the way you say a thing that is finally finished. Then she put it in the fire. The paper curled. The names went outside the window. The snow came down on a country where a school had opened and a debt had closed, and the room was warm, and neither of them said anything for a long time. He held her hand. The glove was off. It still did not fit anything he had been raised to expect, and he had stopped, some months ago, expecting. "Thank you for staying until the end." If Clara's steadiness moved, "You sit with her a moment before you go."